Good morning, Metal Internet. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown. And today we're looking at a brand new EP from the Contortionist entitled Our Bones. The Contortionist is a really cool modern American prog metal band that has been fusing their own very clean and soft-spoken brand of intricate prog with influences from the world of deathcore, influences from the world of black metal, to create some interestingly contrasting, devastating, but also beautiful little pieces. The best example of achievement in that sound couldn't be found on their third album, Language, which probably would stand as my favorite record had it not been for their following record, Clairvoyant, a concept record they created that actually abandons the heavier aspects and leans heavier into the softer, more tranquil, more peaceful, more ambient sides of their sound. While it lacked the diversity and the contrast of Language, and for that matter other Contortionist records, I also thought that it was overall still their most mature record, their most well-performed record, and their most well-produced record, and all things considered, yeah, my favorite record from them. But apparently I must be in the minority, because from what I understand, Clairvoyant ended up being a particularly divisive record for the Contortionist fans. People who missed the heavier, darker, sludgier aspects of the band's sound weren't quite as into the super squeaky clean prog of Clairvoyant, and I understand. I mean, it was definitely a very powerful effect, and there aren't really a lot of other bands doing this same kind of contrast this effectively. The only other band I can think of being Fallujah, but as of their most recent record, I would not say that they are achieving that anymore. And to a certain extent, I think the Contortionists acknowledge this on Our Bones. The record noticeably has a much more metallic feel to it. It is sonically much heavier. There are much more dark textures and sonic layers on this thing than what we heard on Clairvoyant. But at the same time, the record doesn't make a full step back. If anything, the band is continuing to show some really strong evolution and maturity on this EP by combining it a little more effectively with the cleaner and more modern aspects of Clairvoyant, which not only as a result gives us a good sneak peek as to what the next Contortionist record could offer, but also just makes for a really fun, exciting, and inventive little prog metal display. A short one, mind you, but it's an EP, so you take what you can fucking get. This vision, this enveloping sound of the Contortionist can be found pretty immediately on the two tracks Follow and Early Grave, the former of which is a particularly bleak number that takes a lot of influence, I would say, from Between the Buried and Me and Cynic, with its airy melodies, with its very peaceful, tranquil, super squeaky clean, super polished melodies and vocals, contrasting with some very bleak guitars and some very metallic, almost deathcore kind of chugs. That Cynic influence is particularly evident near the latter half of the track, where it does legitimately feel like something that could have been on Cynic's Traced in Air. Whereas the latter track is slower and a lot more brooding, building on some very dissonant kind of chugs. Slowly evolving and taking shape, adding different soundscapes and melodies and bursts of color to contrast with the inherently dark riffing. There's a level of emotional complexity here that even reminds me more so of Deftones than either of the bands that I've previously mentioned, while still retaining the obtuse prog metal feel. Side note, it makes me wonder why Deftones haven't made a prog metal record. I would love to hear that. I really love what's going on here. Once again, they do a great job at combining the darker aspects of Language with the more modern, intricate, clean bits of Clairvoyant, and I think it makes for something that feels really unified and professional and powerful, and as I said, gives us a really good look as to what the next Contortionist record could be like. I particularly love the incredibly soft-spoken yet demanding vocals from Michael Lessard. He's clearly learning a lot in a very short amount of time, and I would even argue that this has some of his best vocal performances to date. He just has a great knack for pulling off these really strong, captivating melodies without tearing away from the emotional and the tranquil nature of these tracks. Unfortunately, from here on out, the EP falls apart a little bit, which isn't to say that any of the tracks that are featured after Early Grave are bad per se. They're just not nearly as interesting, and in one particular case, I don't really see why this song was included at all. That song being the 2-minute little interlude piece being All Gray, which is a short collection of ambient keyboards and weird semi-psychedelic soundscapes that don't evolve to anything, and it feels like the intro to a track but I don't really hear it introducing a track, at least not properly or effectively. I mean, if this were to be an intro, it just doesn't make sense, because the track that follows it just doesn't really fit with it at all. It feels like an afterthought to even have this piece on here, like it was literally an extended little jam that somebody made on a keyboard and it accidentally got put on the EP. That's like the only explanation for it, in my opinion. And speaking of that following track, it is a very puzzling little cover of 1979 from the Smashing Pumpkins. On surface level, it makes sense to cover a song like 1979. It's very melancholic and in theory should fit really well with the more modern sound that the Contortionists have crafted. And for a little bit, it does feel that way. I mean, the band performs it really well. It's arranged with, I think, a little bit more confidence and a little bit more professionalism than that original recording, particularly in the vocals, which are much cleaner. But that's actually kind of the problem. The reason why 1979 works so well is because it has those rough edges, is because the vocals are pretty gnarly and nasally and not the most well performed. I mean, Billy Corgan is not known for his larger-than-life operatic voice. He's known for having a kind of greasy, nasally, unprofessional, almost punk rock kind of tone. And that's part of what makes that original song so great, the contrast that it creates alongside the plodding alternative rock kind of post-grunge vibe that the band aims for. As I said, I've been a big fan of the Contortionist's modern, clean sound, but that being said, this is a song that didn't need to be more modern and more clean, and the fact that it's more professional actually takes away from the vibe of that original song. It's by no means incompetently performed, it's just the wrong type of song for this band to be covering. I'm not really sure what I would rate this, because half of the record is frankly kind of unnecessary and just not nearly as interesting or invigorating, whereas the other half of the record is full of flavor and color and great contrast and a lot of dark soundscapes and a lot of beautiful soundscapes, and it's produced really well and it's performed incredibly well, and it gives us a little sneak peek at that next record. I'm going to settle on a 3 out of 5 because the way I see it, Follow and Early Grave would rank at a 4 out of 5, whereas All Grey and 1979 would probably rank at a 2 out of 5. So that would put us right in the middle there. Not right in the middle of my scale, but right in the middle of those scores, obviously. The people that enjoyed Clairvoyant will be happy to know that those more mature and modern elements still remain, but the people who preferred the earlier stuff like Language will be happy to see that those darker elements have come back into the fray. And I think this would also make a really great accessible first listen for someone who's brand new to prog metal, because there's still a lot going on without feeling overcomplicated and objectively overlong, since it's a fucking EP and not a 60-minute record. So there you have it, 3 to 5, decent little EP. It was nice to have this actually because I've recently reviewed a bunch of modern metal, high-profile records from Slipknot and Carnifex, and pretty soon I'll be looking at a whole slog of death metal. Lots of plans if you're interested in some of the upcoming death metal releases of August. So it was actually really nice to have this little breath of fresh air, this little lemon sorbet of an EP to cleanse my palate, if you will, before diving back into the world of extreme nonsensory. 3 to 5, pretty decent. If you're a fan of the Contortionist, definitely check this out. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately, and you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.